The morning on Harrow Plantation did not arrive like a promise. It arrived like a rule. Mist clung to the fields as if the earth itself wanted to keep its secrets covered. The rows of cotton stretched out in pale lines, and the first light, thin, grey, undecided, slid across them without warmth. Somewhere near the quarters, a bell struck once, then twice, and the sound did what it was meant to do. It pulled bodies out of sleep and into obedience. Men and women moved as if they had been wound up the night before. Bare feet pressed into damp soil. Hands reached for sacks and baskets. Eyes stayed low, not because the ground was interesting, but because looking up could cost a person more than pride. Kofi stepped into the morning with the same quiet as the others, but with a difference he could never hide. He was young, still young enough that hope had not fully been trained out of his muscles, and he carried himself as if he had once walked without permission. His shoulders were straight. His face, even under fatigue, held symmetry that made people stare and then look away as if staring was a sin. In another place, another life, his beauty might have been called a blessing. Here, it was a spotlight. He did not dress differently. He did not speak louder. He did not try to draw eyes. But beauty is a kind of sound you cannot silence. It makes the cruel curious. It makes the jealous hungry. The overseer noticed at first, the way a dog notices weakness. Riggs rode the line of workers on a brown horse that had learned to flinch at the snap of his reins. He was a lean man with a thin mouth and eyes that never rested. His shirt was clean enough to prove he did not work. The whip at his side was not always used, but it was always seen. That was part of its job. Riggs passed Kofi and slowed. He leaned down slightly in the saddle, tilting his head as if examining a fine object in a shop window. "Well now," he said, loud enough for nearby hands to hear, "we got ourselves a pretty one." A few people lowered their heads further. A woman's fingers tightened on her sack strap. Someone's breath caught and stayed caught. Kofi kept his eyes on the row ahead, the leaves wet against his wrists. He had learned that the overseer's words were hooks. The more you reached for them, the deeper they went. Riggs clicked his tongue. "Pretty and quiet," he added. "That's the kind that thinks has better." Kofi did not answer. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply continued forward, placing one foot after another, as if moving through the field was the only thing he had ever been meant to do. That, somehow, was worse. Riggs' horse stepped closer, its shadow falling across Kofi's hands. "You hear me, boy?" Riggs said. Kofi lifted his gaze just enough to show that he had heard. His eyes were dark, steady, not defiant in the loud way. Defiant in the calm way that says, "I will not give you my fear for free." Riggs' mouth tightened. Back to work, Riggs snapped, as if Kofi had done something wrong by merely existing. He rode on, but the air he left behind felt sharper, like metal dragged across stone. By mid-morning, the sun broke through the mist and turned it into steam. Sweat made maps down backs and into waistbands. The field filled with the quiet sounds of labor. Cotton pulled free, sacks dragged, breath measured so it would not become a complaint. Kofi's hands moved with practiced speed, but his mind stayed wide and alert, scanning the world the way a man scans water before he steps in. He watched the horse. He watched the men with rifles at the edge of the field. He watched the way Riggs spoke to the other overseers and how their laughter carried no joy. He noticed, too, the way some of the enslaved looked at him, quick glances, complicated. Some held sympathy. Some held warning. Some held resentment, as if his face had stolen something from them. Kofi understood all of it. On a plantation, even admiration could turn into danger. At the edge of the field, near the path that led back to the main house, a carriage stood still in the shade of live oaks. The owner of that carriage, Mr. Harrow himself, had come down to watch the day as if watching work could make him noble. Harrow was not a big man, but he carried authority like a cloak. His hair was graying at the temples, his vest fitted, his boots polished. He spoke softly, and people leaned in when he did. Softness, in him, was never kindness. It was control. He stood with one hand behind his back, the other holding a thin cane that he did not need. Beside him, a younger man, perhaps a guest, perhaps a clerk, laughed at something Harrow said. The laugh sounded light, as if it belonged in a drawing room, not a field. Then Harrow's gaze moved. It travelled across the rows and stopped. Kofi felt it like heat. He did not look up again. He had learned that the owner's attention could be more dangerous than the overseer's anger. Anger came and went. Interest could linger. Harrow watched for a long moment. His expression did not change. But something in the way he held his cane shifted, subtle as a decision made without words. Riggs returned to Harrow's side later, after barking orders and kicking at a man's drop sack. He leaned down toward the owner and said something too quiet for anyone to hear. Harrow's eyes remained on the field. He nodded once. The bell rang again at noon, and the workers were allowed a short break under the shade of trees where the air was slightly less cruel. A tin cup of water passed between hands. A few mouthfuls of cornmeal were eaten quickly, as if even eating too slowly might be punished. Kofi sat on a fallen log, elbows on knees, breathing through his nose. He did not waste energy speaking. Words were dangerous currency. A figure approached, soft steps, careful. She was older than Kofi by several years, her hands strong, her eyes sharp as needles. She worked in the kitchen and laundry when the house needed extra labor, but she also carried messages, scraps of information, small pieces of survival wrapped in quiet. She sat beside him without asking permission. On the plantation, no one asked permission among their own. They simply tried not to be seen. "You got eyes on you," she murmured, keeping her face turned toward the field as if she were only watching the horizon. Kofi did not answer at first. Then, softly, "I know." Exhaled, the sound half laugh, half fear. "Knowing don't stop it," she said. "It just makes it heavier." Kofi's fingers picked at a splinter in the log. "Why me?" he asked, though he already understood. M's gaze flicked to his face for a fraction of a second, then away. "Because you look like a reminder," she said. "A reminder that you ain't born to be bowed. Some men can't stand reminders." Kofi swallowed. "What do they want?" he asked. M hesitated. In that hesitation lived years of learning when truth was worth speaking. "They want you smaller," she said at last. "Not in body. In spirit." Kofi's jaw tightened, but he made himself breathe. "How?" he asked. M's voice dropped further. "Riggs got away. Dogs." The word landed like a stone in water, ripples of memory spreading, stories whispered at night, warnings spoken like prayers. Hounds trained to chase. Hounds trained to corner. Hounds trained to do what men refused to do with their own hands, so men could pretend their hands were clean. Kofi stared at the field until it blurred. M touched his forearm lightly, one brief contact, a human thing. "Keep your head low," she said. "Even if you got pride, tuck it in for now." Kofi looked at her then. "Pride is all I have," he said. M's eyes softened. "Then hide it like a knife," she whispered. "Don't hand it over." The break ended. The line moved again. The day dragged on with the slow cruelty of routine. It happened near late afternoon, when shadows lengthened and the air cooled just enough to make a person imagine mercy. A sack tore. Cotton spilled. The man carrying it, a teenage boy with trembling hands, stumbled and fell to one knee. It was a small accident. It could have been anyone. Riggs saw an opportunity. He rode over like a storm, shouting, swinging the end of his whip not to strike but to command the field's attention. "Look at this," he bellowed. "Wasteful. Clumsy. Lazy." The boy's eyes filled with terror. "Sir, Riggs cut him off with a curse and a kick that sent the boy's shoulder into the dirt. The boy stayed down, hands protecting his head. Kofi took one step forward without thinking. Not to fight. Not to strike. Just to put himself between cruelty and the helpless, the way his body knew to do in some older memory of community. Riggs' eyes snapped to him instantly. "Well," Riggs said, voice lower now, thick with satisfaction. "The pretty one wants to play hero." Kofi froze. The field froze with him. Even the horse seemed to pause, ears twitching. "I was only," Kofi began. Riggs' whip lashed outward and cracked the air inches from Kofi's face. It did not touch him, but it did what it was designed to do. Make the body flinch. Kofi forced himself not to. Riggs smiled, showing teeth. "Only what?" he asked. Kofi's throat tightened. He could feel every pair of eyes on him. He could feel Harrow's attention somewhere beyond the rows, like a cold coin pressed to the skin. Kofi chose his words carefully. "Only trying to help him stand," he said. Riggs' smile widened. Help, he echoed, as if the word itself were a joke. He turned his horse in a small circle, making a show of thinking. You know what I think. Riggs said. I think you been walking around like you ain't owned. Like you got some kind of shine that makes you special. He leaned down. You think you too pretty for a lesson? Kofi's hands curled into fists at his sides. He loosened them again. He could not afford anger. Anger was what they wanted to see. Riggs straightened, looked across the field, and called out, Mr. Harrow. The owner approached at a measured pace, his cane tapping softly against the packed earth. He did not hurry. He never hurried. Hurrying was for people without power. Harrow stopped a few feet away, eyes moving from the boy on the ground to Kofi standing stiff and silent. What is this? Harrow asked. Riggs did not hide his excitement. This one, he said, nodding at Kofi, been causing stir. People looking at him like he a prince. He stepped out of line. Kofi kept his eyes lowered now. Not out of surrender. Out of strategy. Harrow studied him as one might study a fine horse. He is Harrow said slowly, and the pause was sharp, noticeable. Riggs chuckled. Yes, sir. Harrow's gaze shifted toward the kennel buildings visible in the distance, low structures near the edge of the property, surrounded by fencing and a smell that carried even from far away. He tapped his cane once. Take him, Harrow said. His voice remained calm. That calmness made the sentence feel like a sentence carved in stone. Put him where attention cannot reach him. Riggs' eyes gleamed. Yes, sir. Kofi's heart hammered once, hard, against his ribs. He did not run. Running would prove them right. Running would turn a punishment into a hunt. Two men approached. Hands grabbed his arms. Somewhere in the line, made a sound, small, strangled, but swallowed it down. Kofi did not look at her. If he looked, he might break. They marched him across the yard, past the main house where curtains hung like secrets, past the kitchen where smoke curled upward, past the toolshed where metal glinted, and finally toward the kennel. The closer they came, the louder the sound became. Not just barking. Not just growling. A chorus of agitation, of animals trained to live on edge, to respond to fear like it was a command. The kennel area was separated from the rest of the plantation like a different world. The air smelled of wet fur, old straw, and something sharp, iron and neglect. A man stood near the gate, older, shoulders slumped, holding a bucket. His hair was white at the edges, and his eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. This was the Tsar, I. When he saw Kofi being dragged forward, his face tightened. Riggs swung down from his horse and walked up to I. Open it, Riggs ordered. I hesitated just long enough for Riggs to notice. Now, Riggs repeated, voice low. His hand moved. Keys jingled. The gate opened with a groan. Inside, cages lined the fence, each holding a dog, or sometimes two, muscles taut, eyes wild. Some lunged at the bars. Some pressed back, uncertain, tails low. All of them smelled the fear in the air and reacted the way they had been taught. Riggs led the men to a smaller door set into the side of a low stone building. A cellar door. A place that did not belong to sunlight. He looked at Kofi and smiled as if he were about to offer a gift. You want to be seen? Riggs said softly. Let's see how you look in the dark. He yanked the door open. Cold air breathed out. The stairs descended into shadow. They shoved Kofi forward. His feet slipped on the first step, caught on the second. He grabbed the wall, damp and slick. Riggs followed him down one step, leaning in. You come out when I say, Riggs whispered. If you come out early, the dogs come in. Understand? Kofi's chest rose and fell. He forced himself to speak evenly. I understand, he said. Riggs' smile vanished, irritated by Kofi's control. He motioned sharply, and the men shoved Kofi down the remaining steps. The door slammed above him. Darkness thickened, swallowing detail. For a moment, Kofi could see nothing at all. Then, slowly, his eyes adjusted. The cellar was not large. Stone walls. A low ceiling. A shallow puddle covering part of the floor. Rusted chains looped through iron rings in the wall, though none were currently locked to his wrists. And in the far corner, shapes. Dogs. 2 of them, maybe 3. It was hard to tell in the gloom. Their eyes reflected faint light from the cracks under the door, small points like coals. A growl rolled through the space, deep and warning. Kofi did not move. His body screamed at him to back away, but there was nowhere to back away to. Panic would turn him into prey. Panic would make the animals do exactly what they had been trained to do. So he breathed. Slow in. Slow out. He lowered himself carefully to one knee, hands open at his sides, palms visible. Not submission, communication. A way of saying, I am not striking. I am not attacking. Another growl, then the sound of claws scraping stone. A dog shifted forward, and Kofi caught the outline. A broad head, a thick neck, ribs visible under fur that should have been glossy but wasn't. This was not a well-loved animal. This was a weapon kept sharp through hunger and fear. Kofi spoke quietly, not to command, but to fill the dark with something steady. Easy, he murmured. Easy, brother. The word brother felt strange on his tongue in this place, but he meant it. In the cellar, everyone was trapped. The dogs, too, were prisoners of training. The dog paused, nostrils flaring. It took another step. Kofi did not reach out. Reaching out would be too fast, too foolish. He stayed still and let his voice do what his hands could not. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. I'm here because they put me here. Silence stretched. The dog's breathing was loud. Then, from the corner, a second dog made a softer sound, a whine, almost. Kofi turned his head slightly, careful not to snap his gaze. There, half hidden, was another shape. Smaller. Lying down. One leg tucked under at an odd angle. When it shifted, Kofi saw a faint dark stain on the fur, old, dried. Not fresh, but enough to tell him the truth. One of them was hurt. The first dog, larger, dominant, stood between Kofi and the injured one, not just threatening him, but guarding. Kofi understood that, too. He swallowed, and very slowly lowered himself further, sitting on the damp stone as if he had chosen this place. He made himself smaller without becoming weak. All right, he whispered. I won't come closer. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time in darkness becomes a thing without edges. Above, footsteps came and went. Once, the door opened slightly, and a thin line of light cut through the room. A bucket slid down the stairs. Water, maybe food. The door slammed again. The dogs did not rush the bucket. They watched Kofi, waiting to see what he would do. Kofi crawled to the bucket slowly, inch by inch, keeping his body low. The larger dog tracked him with its head, muscles tight, but did not attack. When Kofi reached the bucket, he saw a piece of bread and a chunk of something dried and salty. Not enough for a man. Not enough for animals either. He tore the bread in half. He held the larger half out, not toward the big dog, but gently toward the space between them, setting it on the stone. Then he took a smaller piece and ate it, not greedily, not with fear, but with the same steady calm as his breathing. The dog's ears shifted. It stared at the bread, then at Kofi. Kofi leaned back against the wall, hands open again. Go on, he murmured. Take it. The big dog did not move at first. Pride existed in animals too, especially those trained to never accept kindness. But hunger is a language that speaks louder than pride. Slowly, the dog stepped forward, sniffed the bread, then snatched it and retreated, chewing with eyes still locked on Kofi. Kofi did not flinch. He did not smile. He simply watched, learning. In the corner, the injured dog raised its head, nostrils twitching at the smell of food. It did not come forward. Kofi tore another small piece from what remained of his portion and rolled it gently across the stone, letting it stop closer to the injured animal. The big dog growled once, warning. Kofi froze. Then, softly. For him, he said. Not for me. The big dog's growl faded into a low rumble, uncertain. The injured dog hesitated, then dragged itself forward with a quiet rasp of claws. It took the bread delicately, as if afraid that even eating might be punished. Kofi felt something twist in his chest, anger, grief, recognition. They had put him with dogs to make him feel less than human. But in the dark, he saw something different. He saw living beings shaped by cruelty, trying to survive it. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds. Chewing, breathing, the distant barking above, the faint drip of water. When he opened his eyes again, the larger dog was watching him differently, not as immediate prey, not as a stranger to attack, but as a presence to measure. Kofi met the dog's gaze without challenge. In that gaze, he made a silent vow. They could lock him in stone. They could surround him with teeth. But they would not get what they wanted most. They would not get his spirit. In the corner, the injured dog shifted closer to the larger one, pressing its side against him. The big dog allowed it, protective and tired. Kofi whispered into the darkness, voice barely more than breath. "We'll survive," he said. "All of us, if we can." The cellar remained cold. The night remained long. But something had changed. For the first time since the door slammed shut, the big dog stopped growling. And in that small silence, Kofi found the first crack in the prison they had built for him. Kofi learned the cellar by sound before he learned it by sight. In the first hours, darkness was a wall. It pressed against his eyes until his thoughts felt trapped inside his skull. But sound slipped through the dark like water. The drip of moisture from stone, the restless shift of paws, the distant chorus of barking that rose and fell above him like a tide. He measured time by the way the kennel noise changed. At night, the barking became sharper, more anxious, more frantic, as if the dogs feared what the dark could hide. Near dawn, the sound softened into tired whines and heavy breathing. The plantation woke again with boots on dirt and voices that carried authority without effort. The cellar, though, stayed the same. Cold, damp, and honest about what it was. Kofi sat with his back against the wall, knees drawn up. He held his body still, not because he was calm, but because stillness was the only language that did not invite teeth. Every movement mattered. Every breath mattered. The dogs watched him, and he watched them back, learning their rules the way a man learns a river, by respecting its current. The big one, the guard, kept the front corner like a sentry. In the faint light that seeped under the door, Kofi could see his outline more clearly now. A thick chest, scarred muzzle, ears that twitched at every sound. His eyes were not mindless. They were tired. They looked like eyes that had seen too many commands and too little kindness. The injured dog stayed low, near the back wall. He moved as if one leg did not fully belong to him. When he breathed, it was shallow, careful, like he had learned that deep breaths could be punished. On the second day, Kofi heard keys above him. Metal scraped. The door opened a crack, spilling a line of weak light down the stairs. A bucket slid in again. Water, stale bread, a piece of salted meat that smelled like it had been meant for dogs, not men. The door did not open wide enough for a face to appear. Whoever brought the food did not want to be seen by the cellar. Kofi waited until the latch clicked shut again. Only then did he move. He repeated what he had done the first time. Tore the bread, set most of it down closer to the big dog, and kept only a small piece for himself. He did it slowly, so the dogs could follow every step. Nothing sudden. Nothing hidden. The big dog watched the bread, then watched Kofi, suspicious of the exchange. Kofi spoke softly into the dim. "Fair," he murmured. "We eat. We live." The word fair felt like a prayer in a place built on unfairness. The big dog approached, sniffed, grabbed the bread, retreated. Still watching. Still guarding. But he did not growl this time. That was the first change. The second change came later, when the injured dog tried to drag himself toward the water and nearly slipped in the puddle. His paw skidded. His body jerked. A small yelp escaped him before he could swallow it. The big dog stood instantly, stiff with alertness, but did not move to help. He stared, torn between instinct and the training that had taught him not to be gentle. Kofi's chest tightened. He did not rush forward. Instead, he slid his own tin cup, empty, across the stone, pushing it toward the injured dog the way he had pushed bread. The cup scraped softly, a sound that made the big dog's head snap around. Kofi froze mid-motion. "It's all right," he whispered. "Just this." The big dog stared at the cup, then at Kofi's hands. Kofi slowly placed both palms flat on the stone and leaned back, making himself unthreatening again. Minutes passed. The injured dog crawled forward and licked at the cup as if it were the only safe thing in the room. Kofi kept his eyes on the floor, but his senses stayed wide open. He could feel the big dog measuring him, not as prey now, but as a strange kind of presence, something that did not fit the usual patterns. That afternoon, The door opened fully for the first time. Light flooded down the steps, and with it came the smell of the outside. Sun-warmed dust, straw, sweat, and something sharp, whiskey or tobacco. Riggs descended 2 steps and stopped, smiling as if he had come to check on a planted seed. "Well," he said, voice echoing off stone. "Look at you. Still breathing." Kofi rose slowly to his feet, careful not to startle the dogs. Riggs' eyes flicked to the big dog, then to the injured one. "Didn't chew you up yet," Riggs said. "Maybe you ain't as sweet as you look." Kofi kept his face calm. Riggs leaned forward, peering down as though Kofi were a bug in a jar. "You learn anything?" Riggs asked. Kofi did not answer. Riggs chuckled. "Let me tell you what you supposed to learn," he said. "You supposed to learn that you ain't special. You ain't a pretty statue. You a thing. Same as them dogs. You breathe because I allow it." Behind Kofi, the big dog made a low sound, not a full growl, but not friendly either. It was a warning that belonged to the animal, not the training. Riggs noticed. His smile thinned. Quiet, Riggs snapped and cracked his whip once, not at the dog, but against the air, as if the sound itself were enough to remind the animal what fear meant. The big dog flinched. Just slightly. But Kofi saw it. He saw the truth that lived in the flinch. The dog was not born a monster. The dog was made. Riggs looked back at Kofi. "You get hungry enough, you start begging," he said. "You get scared enough, you start thanking." He climbed back up the steps and shut the door hard, sealing the light away. When the darkness returned, Kofi exhaled slowly. He sat again, and for a long time he did nothing but listen to his own breathing, steadying it. It would be easy to hate the dogs for being near him. It would be easy to fear them until fear became anger. But Kofi understood something now. The cellar was a lesson meant to teach him that he was alone. So he made a decision. He would refuse the lesson. On the 3rd day, the Tsar came down. This time, the door opened and stayed open long enough for a figure to appear in the frame. Shoulders bent, a lantern in one hand. His face looked older in the cellar light, carved by regret. He stepped down carefully, as if the stairs themselves might accuse him. He kept his eyes low, not out of disrespect, but out of shame. Kofi stood, careful. "You're the one who feeds them," he said quietly. His hand tightened around the lantern handle. "I do what I'm told," he muttered. Kofi watched him. "Do you?" he asked. His jaw worked. "Don't talk like that," he hissed. "Not here." He glanced back up the stairs, listening, as if the walls might repeat words to Riggs. Then he looked at the dogs. "They don't know nothing but what we put in 'em," I whispered. "They train to take fear and turn it into teeth." Kofi nodded slowly. "And what are you trained to do?" he asked. I flinched, the same way the big dog had. "Keep your head down," I snapped, but the sharpness in his voice was thin, defensive. He set down a small bowl of water, then another, and a handful of scraps. The big dog approached cautiously, eyes on eye now, remembering the whip's crack. He did not growl. He did not wag his tail. He simply existed, tense and ready. His gaze flicked to Kofi's face, quick and uneasy. "You shouldn't be in here," I said. Kofi's lips tightened. "I'm here because my face bothered them," he replied. I looked away. "A man don't like it when people look at something he owns and see more than ownership," he murmured. Kofi stepped half a pace forward, then stopped, seeing his tension. "Tell me his name," Kofi said, nodding toward the big dog. I hesitated. "Bran," he said finally. "That one's Bran." Bran's ears twitched at the sound. Not recognition, more like reflex. "And the injured one?" Kofi asked. His eyes softened a fraction. "No name," he said. "Riggs don't like names. Names make you think a thing got a soul." Kofi stared at the injured dog. "Then I'll call him Ash," Kofi said. "Because he looks like he'd been burned down and still breathing." I swallowed hard. He crouched near the injured dog and, with movements so gentle they looked foreign on him, checked the leg. The dog did not bite. He trembled, but he let I touch him. Kofi watched closely, memorizing the Tsar's gentleness like one memorizes a rare bird. "You ever been bitten?" Kofi asked. I gave a bitter smile. "Not by them," he said. "Not yet." Kofi understood. Some bites did not leave marks. Before I left, he paused at the bottom of the stairs. "Riggs hell come back," he whispered. "He wants you to break." Kofi's voice was steady. "If I break," he said, "it won't make him whole." His eyes flicked up, startled by the truth. Then the Tsar turned away quickly, like a man afraid of catching hope, and climbed back into the light. After the door shut, Kofi sat and looked at Bran. Bran looked back. In that shared gaze, something quiet passed between man and animal. An agreement formed without words. "We are both in a cage," it said. "But cages can be learned. And what is learned can be unlearned." That night, Kofi took his small portion of food and, instead of eating it, he pushed it toward Ash. Ash ate, trembling. Bran watched, then lay down, not relaxing fully, but lowering himself, as if he were tired of standing guard for a world that only punished him. Kofi leaned his head back against the stone and let his eyes close. In the dark, he whispered to himself, to the dogs, to whatever part of the world still listened. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start changing the rules." The next morning did not bring a rescue. It brought an opening. Openings were never announced on a plantation. They arrived disguised as mistakes. A latch left loose, a guard stepping away too long, a man too drunk to count keys carefully. The system was built to feel perfect, but it was run by humans, and humans always spilled something. Kofi noticed the first spill in his eyes. When the Tsar came down again, his hands trembled slightly as he set the food. He did not look at Kofi at first. Then he did, briefly, just long enough to pass a message without speaking it. Later. The word wasn't said. It was placed in the air between them like a coin set on a table. That day, Riggs did not come. Harrow did not come. The cellar stayed quiet except for the dog's breathing and the drip of water. Kofi used the quiet like a tool. He studied Bran's rhythm, how the dog shifted his weight, how his ears moved when sounds came from above, how he responded to certain tones. Kofi tested his own voice, not commanding, not begging, just steady. "Bran," he said softly, and waited. Bran did not wag his tail. He did not soften his eyes. But he did turn his head. Kofi repeated the name again later, pairing it with calm. Food placed down, water shared, no sudden hands, no fear-scented panic. It was slow work, like teaching a bruised mind to trust again. Ash stayed close to Bran, limping more than crawling now. The leg was healing poorly, stiff and painful, but he was alive, and he had begun to look at Kofi with something close to curiosity. By evening, Kofi had a plan, not a perfect plan, but a living one. He would not fight the dogs. Fighting was what Riggs wanted. Riggs wanted blood. Riggs wanted a story he could tell with a grin. Kofi would do something harder. He would make the dogs refuse the script. That night, the door opened unexpectedly. Light poured down, bright enough to sting Kofi's eyes. He raised one hand to shield them, blinking. I stood there again, but this time he was alone. No Riggs. No guards. He held the lantern high, and in his other hand, he held a ring of keys. Kofi's heart hit his ribs once, hard. I descended slowly, as if each step were a confession. I don't got long, he whispered. Kofi kept his voice low. Why? He asked. I swallowed. Because I'm tired, he said. And because I seen your face and it reminded me I used to be something other than this. Kofi did not waste the moment with gratitude. Gratitude could come later, if later existed. How? Kofi asked. I held up the keys. Cellar door, he said. Kennel gate. One back latch that leads to the feed shed. From there you can reach the tree line if you run like your life yours. Kofi's mind moved fast, assembling paths like puzzle pieces. And the dogs? Kofi asked, glancing toward Bran. His expression tightened. They'll chase, he whispered. They train to. Kofi nodded once, accepting the truth. Then he said, quietly, Not if I take the training away. I stared at him, confused and afraid. You can't, he hissed. Kofi met his eyes. Watch me, he said. He turned to Bran. He kept his body low and his movements slow. Bran, he whispered. The dog's head lifted. Kofi took the smallest scrap of meat and placed it on the stone near Bran's paws. Bran did not eat it immediately, which told Kofi everything. The dog's hunger was not the only hunger in him. There was also caution, pride, habit. Kofi spoke again, voice even. "Stay," he murmured, not as a command, but as a request wrapped in calm. He did not know if Bran understood the word. But Bran understood tone. Bran understood the difference between fear and steadiness. Kofi stood and moved toward the stairs. Bran rose immediately, tense, ready to follow, ready to stop him, because that was what the cellar had taught the dog to do. Block, guard, prevent. Kofi froze. He turned slightly, not facing Bran head-on like a challenger, but sideways like a man sharing space. "Easy," he whispered. Bran's body quivered. His eyes were sharp. Kofi breathed slowly and lowered his hand, palm open, not reaching to touch, just showing emptiness. Behind Kofi, I held his breath. The moment stretched thin. Then Bran took one step back. It was not surrender. It was choice. Kofi moved again, slow, careful. One step. Another. Bran followed with his eyes but did not lunge. Ash limped closer, watching. Kofi reached the stairs and began to climb. His face looked torn apart by fear and hope. "Go," I whispered. "Go now." Kofi climbed into the light. The air outside the cellar tasted different, cool, alive. For a second, he stood at the top step and simply breathed, letting the world remind him it was bigger than stone walls. Then he moved. I led him through the kennel area. The cages rattled as dogs sensed movement and began to bark. Some lunged. Some whined. The noise rose quickly, dangerous as fire. His voice shook. "Feel wake somebody," he whispered. Kofi's eyes scanned the fence line. He saw the feed shed, the back latch, the shadow of trees beyond. Then he heard it, boots on dirt. A shouted question. Someone had noticed the barking. I shoved the ring of keys into Kofi's hand. "I can't go farther," he hissed. "Feel hang me." Kofi's throat tightened. He wanted to say something human. Something grateful. Something that would honor what I was risking. But the plantation did not allow long speeches. Kofi clasped his wrist once, a quick grip that carried all the words he couldn't afford. Then he ran. Not like a panicked animal. Like a man who had chosen his direction. He sprinted to the feed shed and yanked the latch. The door stuck. He slammed his shoulder into it once, twice, Wood groaned, then gave. Inside the shed, the smell of grain hit him. He shoved sacks aside until he found the back exit. It opened into a narrow path along the fence. Behind him, the kennel noise exploded into chaos. Shouts, whistles, a gun cocked, a man yelling Riggs' name like a prayer to a devil. Kofi ran along the fence line, keeping low. He reached the gate near the far corner, hands shaking as he searched for the correct key. Metal scraped. A key turned. The gate opened. The tree line waited like a dark promise. He slipped through and pulled the gate nearly shut behind him, leaving it just enough open to look accidental, not planned. If it looked like a mistake, Riggs would punish the wrong people first, wasting time. Kofi ran into the trees. Branches whipped his face. Roots grabbed at his ankles. He did not stop. Then he heard it. A new sound joining the pursuit. Not human boots. Dogs. The barking grew closer. Kofi's heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. He angled toward a shallow creek he had seen once from the field, a thin ribbon of water that could steal scent. He plunged into it, water shocking cold around his calves. He moved upstream, stepping on stones, forcing himself not to splash. Behind him, the barking reached the creek and fractured, confused, searching. Then another sound, deeper, heavier, cut through the noise. Bran. Kofi's stomach dropped. He had not freed Bran. He had only asked him not to follow. But training is a chain, and chains do not vanish in one night. Kofi kept moving, jaw clenched. He reached a bend where the creek widened. He climbed out and ran through thick brush, smearing his body against leaves to break scent, forcing his breath to stay controlled. The barking followed, then paused. A growl sounded. A brief yelp. The sound of dogs colliding. Kofi stopped behind a fallen log and peered back through branches. In the moonlight, he saw shapes, several hounds, lean and fast, pulling at the ground, circling. And among them, Bran. Bran stood between the pack and the direction Kofi had run. His body was rigid, head low, teeth bared, not at Kofi, but at the other dogs. He was not attacking to kill. He was blocking. The pack lunged. Bran snapped and shoved them back, not with bloodlust, but with authority. The hounds hesitated, confused by a leader refusing the hunt. Kofi's breath caught. He understood then. Bran had not come to drag him back. Bran had come because the cellar had changed something. The dog still wore training like a scar, but beneath it, an older instinct had awakened. Loyalty not to a master, but to the one who had shared bread in the dark. A whistle pierced the air, Riggs, somewhere far back, calling the dogs. The hounds twitched at the command, torn. Bran did not move. He stood firm, a wall made of muscle and choice. That was enough. Kofi turned and ran again, deeper into the trees, into the unknown. Behind him, the barking grew distant, scattered. And for the first time since the plantation had stolen his name and his life, Kofi felt something close to freedom, raw and frightening and real. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs shook. When he finally collapsed behind a cluster of pines, he pressed his forehead to the earth and listened to the silence. No bells. No whips. No orders. Only his breath. Only the night. And somewhere far away, a single bark echoed, one last sound, not of pursuit, but of farewell. Freedom, Kofi discovered, was not a door you stepped through and left behind you. It was a road that kept asking for payment. By the second day in the woods, hunger began to argue with his courage. His stomach cramped. His mouth tasted like fear and creek water. He found berries he did not trust, roots he recognized only by instinct, and a rabbit he watched disappear into brush like it had been born to mock him. At night, the cold pressed into his bones. He wrapped himself in leaves and tried to sleep, but every snapped twig in the distance turned his heart into a fist. He could have kept going. North, if the stories were true. Toward roads where strangers might be kind or might sell him for profit. Toward towns where men spoke of freedom and still looked at skin like a price tag. But the faces he left behind followed him. MS warning eyes. The boy who had spilled cotton and been kicked into dirt. The women in the line who swallowed their sounds so they would not be punished for caring. And Bran, standing in moonlight, refusing the hunt, as if saying, "Don't make my choice meaningless." On the third night, Kofi made his own choice. He turned back. Not to surrender. To steal something larger than his own body. He returned to the plantation's edge before dawn, moving like a shadow along the tree line. From there, he could see the main house's windows, dim and silent. He could see the field, empty now, waiting for the day's cruelty to begin again. He waited near the laundry shed, because he knew MS movements. The kitchen and laundry were the veins of the plantation. Information flowed there, because women spoke while working, and the house staff heard what the owners thought was private. When the first workers arrived, carrying baskets, Kofi stayed hidden behind stacked wood until he saw her. M moved quickly, head down, hair wrapped, hands busy. But when she reached the corner where the shed cast a shadow, she paused, just a fraction. Kofi stepped into the shadow. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened. For a second she looked like she might scream. Then she slapped him. A quick, sharp slap across his cheek. Kofi blinked, stunned. MS' mouth trembled. "Don't you ever do that," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you ever vanish and come back like I'm supposed to keep my heart alive in pieces." Kofi swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. MS' eyes shone. "You alive," she hissed. "That's what matters." Then her expression hardened, practical again. "They been hunting," she whispered. Riggs near went mad. Harrow been quiet, which worse? They took I. Kofi's chest tightened. "Where?" he asked. MS' voice shook. "To the stable yard." Questioning. Beating him with words first. Maybe worse later. Kofi closed his eyes for a brief second, pain cutting through him. "I have to get people out," he said. M stared at him like he had spoken an impossible prayer. "You one man," she whispered. "And this place built to crush men." Kofi met her gaze. "Then we don't fight it like men," he said. "We fight it like water. Quiet. Persistent. Slipping through." M swallowed, thinking fast. "There's a wagon that goes to town every 2 days," she said. "Food supplies. Sometimes cloth. Sometimes," she hesitated, then forced the word out. Sometimes people. Kofi's jaw clenched. Who drives it? He asked. Mr. Harrow's clerk, she said. But the guard on it he drinks. He falls asleep in the shade by the river crossing. Kofi nodded slowly. We need a distraction, he said. M's eyes narrowed. And we need a place to hide, she replied. A place they don't look, because they think they own it too much to fear it. Kofi thought of the kennel. The dogs. The cellar. The place where they threw problems to rot. M followed his gaze, understanding dawning with horror. No, she whispered. Kofi's voice stayed low. Yes, he said. Because they think nobody chooses that place. They moved with the speed of people who had learned that hesitation killed. Over the next day, they planted small preparations. Extra cloth tucked behind barrels, a small knife hidden under a loose floorboard, food crumbs saved and wrapped, a signal scratched into a post where only the desperate would look. That night, Kofi slipped toward the kennel fence again. He found Bran first. The dog was not in the cellar now. He was chained near the outer pen, muscles tense, eyes sharp, ribs visible. When he saw Kofi, his body stiffened, not with attack, but with recognition that hurt. Kofi approached slowly, palms open. Easy, he whispered. Bran's ears twitched. His eyes searched Kofi's face as if asking a question dogs cannot speak. Kofi crouched, keeping distance. I came back, he murmured. Not for me. Bran's throat made a low sound, almost like a warning, almost like a plea. Kofi reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of bread M had stolen for him. He placed it on the ground. Bran did not eat immediately. He stared at Kofi, then at the bread, then back at Kofi. Kofi waited. Finally, Bran ate. Slow. Still watching. Kofi's gaze slid to the chain. He did not have the key. He could not free Bran without alerting everyone. Not yet. But he could do something else. He leaned closer, voice barely audible. Tomorrow, he whispered. When the noise comes, don't follow the whistle. Bran stared at him. Kofi did not know if the dog understood the words. But Bran understood tone. Understood the weight of tomorrow sitting in Kofi's breath. Kofi stood and melted into the shadows again. At dawn, the distraction began. A small fire, carefully controlled, flared near the toolshed, smoke rising enough to draw attention. Men shouted, ran with buckets, cursed at each other, trampled mud into puddles. Riggs appeared, furious, whip in hand, barking orders that tangled into confusion. While the yard swarmed toward the smoke, M led 2 women and a teenage boy toward the laundry shed, pretending to carry soaked linens to the river. Kofi guided them from the tree line. They moved low, silent, hearts pounding. They reached the kennel fence and slipped through a loose board M had noticed weeks ago and never spoken about until now. Inside, the dogs began to bark at the movement. The sound could have ruined everything. Then Bran barked too, one sharp bark that cut through the others, not as alarm, but as command. The other dogs hesitated. And for a breath, the kennel became still enough to pass through. Kofi led them into the feed shed and down into the cellar, the last place anyone would search during a fire. The damp stone greeted them like an old curse. The teenage boy trembled. This where they put you? He whispered. Kofi nodded. And it didn't kill me, he said. So it won't kill you. They stayed hidden until the shouts outside changed tone, until the fire was controlled, until the yard's chaos began to settle. Then came the second part. The wagon. When the clerk's wagon rolled toward the river crossing, Kofi and M guided their small group out through the back fence line, keeping to brush. The guard on the wagon, just as M said, had a bottle and a lazy confidence. By the time the wagon reached the shaded spot near the crossing, the guard had slid down from his seat and sat with his back to a tree, eyes heavy. Kofi moved like breath. He did not strike the guard. He did not make a spectacle. He simply took the bottle, poured it into the dirt, and tied the guard's wrists with cloth so the man would wake later with confusion instead of a story of bravery. M climbed up first. The others followed, hiding under sacks and cloth. Kofi took the reins. His hand shook, but not from fear. From the weight of what he was doing. He drove the wagon toward town, away from the plantation, away from the bell, away from the yard where Harrow's cane tapped like a heartbeat. But before the road fully swallowed them, Kofi looked back. In the distance, near the kennel fence, he saw a shape. Bran. The dog stood rigid, chain pulled tight, watching the wagon leave. Kofi lifted his chin slightly, one silent acknowledgement. Bran did not bark. He simply watched, steady as a vow. The first night on the road with others beside him felt stranger than the cellar ever had. In the cellar, Kofi had been alone in a way that made life feel simple. Survive the next hour, then the next. On the road, with M and the others breathing under sacks in the wagon, survival became responsibility. Every sound mattered. Every shadow on the road could be a threat. Every passing rider could be a hunter wearing an ordinary face. They reached the edge of town near dusk and abandoned the wagon behind a cluster of trees. The clerk would find it later, and the story would become a mess of accusations, but by then, Kofi and the others would be gone. They moved through alleys and behind barns, guided by rumor and instinct. M found the first safe door. It belonged to a woman with flour on her hands and tired kindness in her eyes. She did not ask many questions. She did not demand explanations. She simply looked at their faces, thin, frightened, determined, and stepped aside. "Quick," she whispered, "before someone sees." Inside, the air smelled of bread and soap. It smelled like a world that had room for human beings. The woman gave them water. She gave them a small meal. She gave them blankets. Kofi watched the teenage boy eat, hands shaking, eyes wide as if he did not trust food that came without a whip behind it. "This ain't forever," the woman warned softly. "You need to move." Feel search. Not because they care about justice, because they care about property. Kofi nodded. "Well, move," he said. That night, Kofi sat near the window and listened to the town sounds. Distant laughter, a cart rolling over stones, a dog barking somewhere far off. Normal sounds. Human sounds. Sounds that did not exist to command him. M sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket. "You could have kept going alone," she murmured. "You could have been free already." Kofi stared into the dark. "Free alone feels like a lie," he said quietly. M's eyes glistened. "You still got that pride," she whispered. Kofi's mouth tightened. "It's not pride," he said. "It's a name." The next day, they moved again, out of town, toward a river route where a man known for helping runaways sometimes passed. Some called it a network. Some called it treason. Some called it mercy. They traveled at night, hiding by day. Along the way, they met people who helped and people who turned away. A farmer gave them directions but refused to open his barn, afraid of the cost. A preacher offered prayers but no bread. A young woman with a baby gave them a crust and a look that said, "I know what it is to be trapped." Kofi learned quickly that freedom was not a single moment. It was many moments, each one asking whether you would keep choosing to move forward even when fear tried to drag you back. One night, near a marshy bend in the river, they heard dogs. Not the frantic pack sound of the plantation, but a pair of hounds on a distant trail. The teenage boy froze, eyes wide. One of the women began to shake. Kofi crouched, placing his hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. "Breathe," he whispered. "Slow." He listened carefully. The dogs passed far away. Their barks faded into distance. But the fear remained, lingering like smoke. Later, when they reached a small cabin hidden among trees, an older man opened the door and stared at them with sharp suspicion. Then he saw Kofi's face. Not admiration, recognition of something harder. "You," the man said quietly, as if tasting the word. "You the one they've been talking about. The pretty one they tried to break." Kofi's jaw tightened. He hated that nickname. He hated that beauty was always the thing people saw first. "My name is Kofi," he said firmly. "That's what you can call me." The older man's eyes held him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Kofi," he repeated, honoring it. "Come in." In the weeks that followed, Kofi and the others were guided from place to place. Barns, cellars, back rooms, hidden paths. Always moving, always balancing on the edge between hope and capture. And slowly, something changed inside Kofi. At first, he expected freedom to feel like flying. Instead, it felt like learning to walk again. He woke some nights reaching for chains that were not there. He flinched at sudden voices. He found himself scanning every room for exits as if the world was still a cellar. But each day, he practiced something new. Looking up. Not boldly, not recklessly, but openly, as if his eyes belonged to him again. One morning, near the end of their journey, they reached a small town where a man offered Kofi work, paid work, under the table, dangerous but possible. Kofi took the job, not because he loved it, but because being useful without being owned felt like a revolution. He carried wood. He mended fences. He learned names of streets and shops. He learned how to hold coins in his palm without feeling like they burned. Found work too, in a kitchen where the owner paid her in real money and spoke to her like she was a person. It was not perfect. It was not fully safe. But it was a beginning. One evening, as Kofi walked past a window, he caught his reflection. For a second, he did not recognize himself. Not because he looked different, but because the expression in his eyes had changed. The fear was still there, faintly, like an old scar. But it no longer controlled the whole face. He touched his cheek where had slapped him on the day he returned. He smiled slightly. Beauty, he realized, was not the cage. The cage had been what men tried to build around it: envy, ownership, punishment. And cages, he had learned, could be escaped. Months later, when the risk was lower and the road behind them had grown long enough to blur the plantation's reach, Kofi spoke his story aloud for the first time in full. Not in a whisper. In a room with people listening. He did not describe horror for entertainment. He described truth with dignity. He spoke of the bell, the field, the cane tapping against dirt. He spoke of a cellar that was meant to erase him. He spoke of Bran, of a dog trained to hunt who, in one moonlit moment, chose not to. When he finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Then someone exhaled, as if they had been holding their breath for years. Afterward, a woman approached Kofi with tears in her eyes. "They tried to bury you," she whispered. Kofi nodded once. "And I grew back," he said. That night, as he walked home under a sky wide enough to make the world feel possible, Kofi heard a dog bark somewhere nearby. His body tensed instinctively. Then he listened again. The bark was ordinary. Not a command. Not a hunt. Just a dog speaking into the night because dogs sometimes do. Kofi kept walking. He lifted his chin and breathed the cold air, letting it fill him. His name was still his. His spirit was still his. And somewhere, far behind him, in a place he would not return to, the cellar existed like a wound in the earth. But it no longer defined him. He did.